Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. This is Lift Your Legacy, episode number 6 with Rabbi Avraham Edelstein. Now, I just want to talk to you for 1 second about how thrilled I am with the feedback that's coming from this podcast. I really appreciate everyone that's listening to it, everyone that's sharing the podcast, everyone that's subscribing. And so if you feel like this is something that you can get value from, your friends can get value from, the more you share it, the more we're able to reach more people. Now, the person that joined me on my podcast today literally has run multinational organizations, literally world famous, literally goes around the world speaking and talking and coaching, and has been doing it for many, many decades. Rabbi Avraham Edelstein is at the helm of everything going on in Jewish outreach, and he's currently in charge of Neve College, which is a very large seminary catering to women in an advanced Torah studies academy. And he shares today some of the unbelievable insights that come with someone who's both a rabbi and has come from the Torah world, but really has spent quite a long time as a CEO and as an executive. And he shares his own experience and his own journeys and how he's had to pivot in his career, how he's able to keep his eye on the ball of what he's best at. How do you outsource? How do you grow? How do you find mentorship? Like literally, this is kind of like an MBA in a box. So with no further ado, I'm very excited to bring you Rabbi Avraham Edelstein. I am here today with Rabbi Edelstein, the Director of Neve College, Director of Ner LeElef, and a Senior Consultant for Olami. How are you, Rabbi?
I'm doing well, thank God.
Fantastic. So you have a very large amount of responsibilities. You're running probably the largest seminary for women in Jerusalem, as well as the training school to help those that are going to be working in Jewish communities around the world. How did you find yourself in this situation?
I didn't. I fell into it. Ner LeElef was an organization that I started with my partner, Rabbi Avraham. And I really feel that he was more instrumental than I was. I was just tagging on and holding on to his shirt tails. I don't know what he claims about this story. And we started it together with actually Rabbi Edelstein, who is the overall head of Neve College at the time. It was done under the Heritage House. It was done the first program was called the Heritage House training program, kiruv training program. And then it's reached the size after a year that we had to spin it off and create a new entity. So I feel I just fell into that. Under that, a thing that eventually became Olami started, and I became the CEO of that simply because I was standing in the room at the time when the deal was made between the donors. There were 4 of us, Rabbi Avraham, myself, Mr. Eli Horn, and the 2 donors. And, the next day, Rabbi Avraham wasn't really so interested in pursuing that line. He was interested in the training and the vision. So I was tagged. I fell into that. Neve College also, if you would have asked me to list the 20 organizations that I was most likely to go and work for, Neve College would not have been on the list. I was sitting in my office one day when Rabbi Refson's son, Rabbi Yonah Ari Refson, called me up and said, I need to speak to you. It was a Wednesday. And I looked at my diary and I said, sure, let's meet on one Monday. And he said, no, I need to speak to you now. And when somebody as respectable as that says that, it happens. And he came over and he said, my father's in Los Angeles, but he wishes to offer you this job. And I had an immediate resonance with it, And although I needed to understand a little bit more about the mandate and the finances, my initial response was overwhelmingly positive, which seems daring for a change as significant as that, but really so clear to me, and therefore all fell into place. So I don't claim much credit for any of the things that I've done.
Well, I think that the crucial point was that you jumped when the opportunity was there and didn't walk away from the
Yes,
responsibility.
yes,
So
yes.
walk me through, as I feel that in a lot of cases in life, people find themselves in situations where they, with a little bit of courage, they can just sort of walk into what's in front of them. How did you develop the skill sets, or what skill set do you think was most necessary to be able to succeed in terms of running these very significant, large, complicated organizations?
Well, uh, firstly, I had a lot of mentoring along the way, and I had a lot of modeling along the way. Mentors and models are two different types of people. To this day, I have a primary business mentor, let's call him an organizational mentor, somebody who ran an international consulting business, and today who is today a hedge fund manager of several significant hedge funds in Europe and England. And we talk once every 2-3 weeks. Certainly his extremely importance in my ongoing development. And that's another point. I'm never done. I'm growing. I'm reading. I read 4 or 5 business books a year. I debrief people in the field. I'm always looking for best practices. And it's not just because I'm trying to improve myself. It's also because it's a moving target. The generation changes very rapidly. I tell the people in the Welch, we're going to spend a few years getting it right. And as soon as we got it right, we're going to have to do it all over again, because the needs will be very, very different. So I studied a lot about the millennial generation. How do they absorb information? How do they process? What kind of, we made many, many changes in Neve Yerushalayim as a result of that understanding of the learning process of a millennial.
Could I ask you if you could? I'm sure I know it's a multiple volume book, but if you could distill down into a few pointers for those of us that are engaging. I think everybody's engaging this millennial demographic and trying to figure out how to properly approach them. Us, I guess. I don't know. When is the millennial cutoff? How old?
I think it's about 32, 30, something, okay. 35.
So okay. So if it's 35, I'm still in it. If not. What are a couple of points about engaging that demographic that you find very compelling for people that are working in that demographic and trying to run organizations that deal in that demographic?
Okay, let me just tell you what we did in Neve. We shortened classes from an hour to 45 minutes. We made breaks. We created a tremendous amount of one-on-ones. We found that millennials need to process on an individual basis. They need much more individualization. They are less respectful of authority, and therefore we can't lecture them. We have to engage them, and therefore classes have to become much more interactive. They want to know where you're getting things from. We had to introduce source sheets to all the classes, and that doesn't have to do necessarily with text. Even the types of students who are not really textual, but they want to know, where did you get things from? We changed the classroom layout so that it was more no more rows, and we had to introduce also staff that could role model for them, which meant, in the case of Neve Yerushalayim, young female withered staff.
That's amazing. The first thing that popped into my mind is, as you're introducing these radical changes, and as someone certainly not anywhere near as long in the career as you have been, but I've seen that organizations have a tremendous resistance to change. People have a tremendous resistance to change, and very few people recognize the necessity of that change. So what have you done, or how do you speak to and push through these changes in a way that you feel like you are actively making that kind of a difference? And even more general, if a person isn't a CEO and is working within an organization, how do you try to accomplish that?
There's a tremendous amount of studies that have been made and written about in an area called change management, because CEOs take over companies merge, and in all those cases there are culture clashes. The key thing here is, how do you change the culture of an existing organization? And I would say that there are three things here. The first thing is messaging. You have to sell. You cannot simply communicate once or twice about this. You've got to keep on messaging. Look, we did it. We're seeing this. We're seeing the results. We're on track. We're on target. There are people who came around in 2 months. There are people who came around in 3 months. There's somebody who told me only very recently, I'm about 18 months into my directorship, that he did not believe in me in the beginning, and it took him at least a year before he started coming around. So that's point number one. Point number two is that if a strong outsider comes into a significant position, into a mid-sized to large organization, the probability is that somebody's not going to make it. There are going to be the people who simply are not capable of making that culture change. And then you have to cut your losses, and it's very sad and it's very hard. But you cannot have a situation where you have a fifth wheel in the organization. I'm not saying this about my particular situation. I'm just saying as a general principle that I've seen in change management. And the third thing is that you do change management not according to hierarchy, but according to the early adopters and working in concentric circles outwards. Whoever it is, you bring into your circle. If it's the secretary, if it's the administrator, if it's the interviewer, if it's the cleaner. You don't necessarily look to the primary and most significant people to be the early adopters. They, on the contrary, are more invested in what they've built up, and they might be late adopters.
So just to say that back, the first one is that you're consistently having to be clear about the goals and why we're doing them, and not just say it once or twice. The second thing you said is that you have to be comfortable with the idea that someone might not make it and be okay with that. And then you mentioned the third point of not necessarily trying to convince the founders, but rather just trying to find those that will ally with your message. Ally, I guess is the right word. Ally with your message, work with them, and then expect that to slowly over time take root. I guess is that a fair way of suggesting?
That's correct.
Amazing.
Yeah. I just want to say about the first point that the most successful CEO of the 20th century was considered to be Jack Welch.
Yeah.
And of GE. And Jack Welch said that his primary job throughout his CEO-ship, leadership of GE, was selling the messages, the right messages to GE, to his staff within GE, the best practices and other things.
Well, yeah, I think that it's so important for people to understand the crucial nature of selling, and not in an oppressive way, but rather in just being there and trying to help people understand. It can't be overstated. People think that sales is for sleazy people, but the reality is that it's necessary. As that's what it's sounding like from you.
Yes, and by sales, we mean buy-in to not just to the culture. We mean buy into the vision. We mean buy into to the goals that are going to achieve that vision. There are a whole series of values, one might say, in the organization, which you have to sell in order to create the alignment that will allow you to build up a unified team.
Amazing. One of the major questions that is kind of always coming up is that there's these two different skill sets: the initial entrepreneurs, the people that are the trailblazers, that are, very mission driven and will go out and, work 1,000 hours for no pay. And naturally that shows in a lot of cases success. but it becomes very quickly untenable for people to do that consistently. They burn themselves out. They have to bring on a team. But as the team grows and they start to scale, so then you start to lose that level of entrepreneurship, and you wind up having massive organizations. This is probably the profit world as well as the nonprofit world. I'm just familiar with the nonprofit world, whereby, people are not working nearly as hard. There's a lot of overhead, and the organization eventually becomes largely ineffective at engaging the base like it used to be. How does an organization keep that edge while maintaining their size?
It's an extremely difficult task. There are two separate problems here. The first problem is the problem of the founder himself. In the olden days, we had to talk without a book called the E-Myth, which today dealt very nicely with this exact issue, that the startup guy is really three personalities in one, and he may not be comfortable with all sides of his personality. He's the Makarov, he's the outreach guy, which in E-Myth language, let's say that's his art, right? He's the entrepreneur, the go-getter who's building this, making programs and running Shabbatonim, and he can do it even if he's quite pathetic at logistics and organization. He can just do it by sheer energy in the beginning, the seat of his pants, and he'll be excited by it. And then he has to emerge as this manager for which he has no training, and he might not be even suitable for it. You might say that he's been Peter principled out of his comfort zone, but it's not really being Peter principled. Peter principle means that he's been promoted to one level above his level of competence. This is not, it's not an issue of competence, issue of compatibility between what moves him and inspires him and what he's capable of doing. So in my opinion, I'm a particular example. The reason that I jumped at this Neve College opportunity, amongst others, was it allowed me to get back on the shop floor. It allowed me to move from things that I wasn't really enjoying on a day-to-day basis, budgets, targets, and I might have had a skill set which allowed me to do them. And I certainly had a very deep satisfaction that I was making a difference to the Jewish people, but day-to-day I was not enjoying my job. And I moved over to Neve College, and I'm loving it. Okay, now there's a lot of organization and management and all those components, but in the end of the day, I'm out there every break talking to the students. I'm seeing them growing. I'm interviewing them when they come in. I'm finding out what their goals are. I'm connected in a very real sense to the shop floor, as we might call it. So many people who develop their organizations find themselves pushed into positions which, again, they might not have the skill set. Two, they might not be enjoying it, and it might be both. So what should they do?
Right. I was going to,
Yes.
just to drill down, like, if I'm not enjoying it, so does that mean I should be in a different place if my organization has grown to a certain size?
Right. So very few, the first thing that one has to know, look, historically speaking, I was a director of outreach for Or Sameach, a position that was my first real position, a position that was created for me and was closed down when I left. I then became the executive director of the Heritage House. At some stage, after a couple of years, Rabbi Meir Schuster Zatzal, who I was extremely close with, came to me and said, look, I want you to become a full partner in the organization. And I said no. And the reason I said no was I said to myself, what's the upside of becoming a co-director in terms of ownership? What will I be able to do that I'm not doing now? And there was none. And I said, what's the downside? And the real downside was that I'd be stuck with this organization. I'd never be able to leave. So I developed a philosophy, and I'm saying this as a message to people in the field, that even the organizations that I would start afterwards, which applied very directly to Ner LeElef and to Olami, although it was very much donor driven and as much as it was ours. The idea I developed can be expressed as the following. I am committed to this organization as a framework and only as a framework. No organization is anything more than just a means to an end. And I'm going to work in this organization today as if I'm going to be working in this organization for the rest of my life until tonight. Okay. If tonight I believe that it's no longer the best expression of my potential and I can responsibly leave, then I should do that. And in fact, today, in terms of Ner LeElef, I'm not the day-to-day guy in Ner LeElef anymore. There are a few things that I'm involved with that I can do fairly easily as a result of cumulative experience and insider's knowledge. But essentially speaking, I'm in Neve Yerushalayim today. You might ask, well, how can you do that? Neve Yerushalayim is not your organization. You became an employee of Rabbi Edelstein. And Ner LeElef was your own organization. How could you leave your own organization? Let's just say if I was given an ultimatum today, I would accept that ultimatum with grace. I'm still the director of Ner LeElef, but the point is that I'm willing, and it's not even hard for me to walk away from an organization that I founded, if that would need to be the case. I'm not overly invested in the organization beyond it being something that I love to do and I want to do for the rest of my life, right, until the point is reached where maybe I need to move on.
Is that a sense of humility that I don't need to be, which is, again, I keep quoting this. Rabbi Wein taught me that he says that everyone goes into Rabbanus has a little bit of a messianic complex. So is it that that humility that you can that you must cultivate to say that the organization and the mission can go on without me, or is it more a sense of I need to stay true with myself to be the best person, which means that I don't need to run everything. If I'm genuinely happier with this, shop floor interface, like you had mentioned, that's where I should be. And that's where I'll be the most effective, even if it means, a step down in terms of either pay or honor or the ability to run things, et cetera.
I can't address the issue of humility since I don't claim to be humble. I can say that I have enough of a good ego that I've always been willing to hire staff that were very, very competent, and that, when I was running Ner LeElef Olami as a full-time thing, I can truly say that every single member of staff that was there did their job better than I could have done it. Some of the staff were much more prestigious than myself, had much more rabbinic status than I had. That didn't bother me in the least.
Can I ask you how?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. How did that not to say bother you, but how did you deal with that discomfort that comes with managing or kind of having to speak at a colleague level with people that were, I forgot the terminology you use, but big rabbis? How did you overcome that discomfort of having to speak as a colleague with them?
Well, firstly, we were very careful, and I am today very careful to hire people, including those big rabbis who are team players. So they themselves understood the dynamic. They understood when to give in. They understood that it's not their way or the highway. They understood that they could express things very strongly, and the decision might not be made according to that. And they would pick themselves up and they'd carry on. At the same time, I understood that I had to give them a very clear and open mandate to say what they want in front of whomever they wanted. And there would be talks given to Ner LeElef students where opinions are expressed would be critical of our organization philosophy, not necessarily directly, but it was clear to anybody who understood what Ner LeElef was doing that this was a critique of Ner LeElef, and that was all part of the bargain. I was perfectly fine with that. I did it on the understanding that this is not will produce more than any other combination. It's an understanding that you're developing. You have to have a deep sense of your own limitations and the fact that on your own you're nothing. You really can only do very small things on your own. That you desperately need other people to complement your weaknesses. I've never done anything on my own. I've always had partners. I've never wanted to do anything on my own because I never thought I could do anything on my own. So you have to start off with that sense of what where your limitations are and how other people, the right kinds of people, can really complement you, and they're really empowering you. They're not weakening you when they're doing their thing.
I'm so sorry because you keep trying to drive it at the answer I asked, the question I asked like 10 minutes ago, but I feel that that's such an important point that perhaps you could offer some advice in terms of developing that we have such a need, I think, in a societally imposed need, especially perhaps us on the in the Western Hemisphere, of trying to be everything for everybody. And what you're suggesting for the average guy on the street here in America, it sounds very unempowered. Like, how do you build a strong person who at the same time can admit that he's not capable of doing everything or anything really except by building a team?
It's pretty obvious to me, so sometimes it's hard to articulate to somebody to whom it's not pretty obvious to. Let me express it as the following principle. Big things are done by teams. Loners achieve small things. Now, you can get a loner who has a whole team, but they're just a team of secretaries, no matter what their titles are. And that's not a team. That's not the team I'm talking about. I'm talking about an empowered team. I'm talking about people that from a very young age, I said, oh, he's somebody who could succeed me one day. Let me nurture him. He's got leadership potential. Let me nurture him. And I can't tell you the pleasure it is to take staff and to see them growing, right? And to enable them and to say, you don't need me for that. You can handle that, and to allow them to run with the ball. The principle has to be try and retire. Now, if you're wise, you understand that when you try and retire, by giving away as much of your job as possible, just take it. The more that anybody else can do what you're doing, the better it is. You will also understand that you too will land out operating at a qualitatively higher level. The more you're trying to retire, the more you will actually be achieving more by freeing yourself up to deal with more focused and qualitatively better things.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you. Now, just circling back, you said that the first point, the question was for anyone that didn't follow my crazy train of thought. The question was, how do you maintain your edge as you scale, essentially? And so you had mentioned that first and foremost, it takes that the entrepreneur or the CEO, the person that starts it, has to be real with himself to assess his skill sets and where he's best allocated. You said that was the first part. What was the second part?
Yes. Yeah. So the second point, which I've mentioned, I wasn't clear about it, is that he has to be not overly invested in his position. He has to decide where he's going to best function. I actually know an outreach person who rose up and he started running an organization and he felt frustrated. And he said, no. He says, I'm going back to the front, and he put himself under another organization, and he's happy as a lark. Now, he doesn't see that as a demotion. He sees that as a fulfillment of his potential. One of the problems is that we have internalized false messages. We've internalized the message that you are valued according to your place in the hierarchy of the organization. That is not so at all. It's not a value. It's a division of labor. It's no more than that. So truly there are people who were entrepreneurial and then began to develop management things. And then it's so interesting to see. I know one organization where the organization lost two major staff, and as a result, the head of the organization was forced back into the front line amongst them. And he's so happy now. He's so empowered. He wouldn't have known how to perhaps do that on his own. It was it was God's providence that led him to that. But he recognizes how important that is to his life. So the third thing is that you look after yourself. And you have to look after yourself in various different ways to give yourself that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. It does not have to necessarily be justified organizationally. For about 15 years, there was a second-year seminary program actually in Neve, no connection to my current job, that was called Moreshet. It doesn't exist anymore. It was supposedly an alternative BA track to the Malo track for those who wanted to go into outreach and communal activities. So it was people are out of the box people, young ladies, what we say in Yiddish, lebedike chevra, very energetic, kind of challenging people. And I taught there 3 hours. I was only able to teach first thing in the morning. So we'd go there 8:30 to 10:30 one morning, and 8:30 to 9:30 the next morning. And I could travel as much as I want, which meant twice a month on an average month. And they just put in substitutes. So it allowed me that flexibility. At no stage did I ever pretend that had anything to do with my job, but it did have to do with my life. It gave me that outlet of teaching bright, young, enthusiastic people. And it meant that after that, I could go on to my job and I could feel that I'd had that side of me fulfilled. So very often when we hear speeches about looking after yourself, we hear speeches about, well, make sure that you've got enough time to learning and enough time for all the other sides of your life. Well, very often that is only part of the story. Part of the story is that you have to be creative in finding solutions that nobody else has tried. They're not formula that prove to be your outlets that allow you to stay inspired. One of the ways I did it also was by writing, not just open-endedly, writing blogs for a long period of time, which I don't do today. But I did it because a blog is something, you've got a timeline, it's a limited thing, it's an essay, it's whatever it is, 6 pages. It's something which is defined. And then I had to find time to do it in an extremely difficult day. So I found that if I travel to work by bus, that gives me an hour in the morning, nobody disturbed me. Somebody once made a mistake thinking that they saw me on the bus and they could come and talk to me, but I quickly disabused them of the fact that they did not have an appointment. This was time that was allocated elsewhere. And again, I found that by the time I got to work, I got off that bus and I felt that I'd really done something. I really felt good about the start to my day. That was my own solution that worked for me, living in Jerusalem, where you can take a bus for an hour.
Okay, so I'm realizing very quickly, I don't know if you can tell, I have about an entire page of notes and questions, so I don't know if we'll be able to get to any of them today. So I want to kind of narrow down. Hopefully you will come back, because this is phenomenal. If that would be okay at sometime in the future. I didn't wait for a response, but hopefully you'd be agreeable to that. I hope. Okay, thank you. I guess two questions left for today. How do you find originality in terms of creating programming, maybe for yourself? And this is something you just really touched on, of kind of touching your core and reaching out, and this theme of, the Torah being eternal, but that the generations are consistently changing, and that we are consistently trying to figure out how to properly interface with the new generation in a way that's relevant and meaningful. So how do you find the experience of being original while at the same time trying to fitting within the realm of, obviously, halacha, but just like the way that things have always been done, which has a certain level of expectation and even ritual and holiness within our culture? We're not apt to changing rapidly, but at the same time, the circumstances really demand that we have to change to reach the people that we need to reach.
Yeah. Let's narrow down the issue and exclude the recruitment issue. There are two aspects of this issue. How do you get people in the door to listen to what you have to say to begin with, to participate in your program? And then how do you deliver the kind of program that will provide continuity of experience to the people involved? Let me frame it as follows. I debrief everyone that I can lay my hands on as a Baal Tshuva. How did it happen with you? How long did it take? What were the critical elements, etc.? Over the last years, we did about many thousands. And I'm always trying to look for patterns, and those patterns define me to a certain degree. But I can tell you that as we are dealing with people who are further and further away from Judaism, remember that the Baal Tshuva movement, those who returned to Judaism of 10, 15 years ago, were primarily from the conservative movement. In Neve College today, and a student body that will go up to the 90s within a month in the midsummer, besides all the groups that are coming. So we have one person from the conservative movement. Right. One. Right. The conservative movement below the age of 30 is 12% of the American population. So the process is, it's not just people coming from further afield, but it's taking them much longer. And whereas I used to feel that it took the average person from their first serious engagement with Judaism 3 to 5 years for those who returned, I'm now seeing that after the first engagement, we're talking about a 5 to 10 year process. Okay, so people have to understand the timeline in order to frame what they're doing properly. They cannot have any expectation that somehow because they got somebody through the door, and very often people have to go away and they will come back. You have to believe that if you have provided them with some authenticity, the neshama didn't change, that very often it'll bubble up within them, and they'll be back, but they might not be back next week. They might be back in a year. They might be back in 3 years. And again, from the debriefing, I'm seeing that again and again and again. At a local level of people coming to Neve, we'll get somebody coming for 2 weeks and going away, and then coming back for 3 months for the whole summer, and then going away, and then at the next job opportunity, taking over a year and coming. And it's a multi-year process, and that's after they're ready to come to along the way of their Jewish experience. So that's the first thing, that if you don't frame it correctly, if you have the wrong expectations, if you have impossible expectations from the process, then you're going to program incorrectly. You're programming for the wrong generation. You're programming for the wrong situation, for the wrong demographic. You are not likely to succeed. The second thing is that people do not want compromises on the quality of the content. We do not need gimmicks in terms of content. I and other successful people around me are drawing on the same classical sources as was ever before. It's pure Yiddishkeit. We might use contemporary vocabulary, which I've used throughout this interview, actually. I'm using the contemporary vocabulary on myself as much as I'm using on them, right? So we might need examples that are real and relevant to their lives. They have to know what it's about. There might be different points of interest at different times by different generations, which require a little more emphasis, be it relationships, be it, let's call it spirituality a la Kabbalah or this or that. But if you leave out a comprehensive overview of Judaism, you're not only in a certain sense by misrepresenting Judaism, but you're not going to speak to the totality of their neshama. I found that these people, they want it all. They want a helicopter view. They want to understand, what is this whole picture done? Just tell me about that, and tell me about this, and tell me about that. They are no less, they're less capable of asking questions, the millennial generation, of initiating the questions. But once you've asked the question for them, or you framed it for them, once you've got their thinking processes going, they're just as perceptive, they're just as deep, and they demand just as much profundity. So that's a statement, right? To say, don't leave the basics behind when you're thinking creatively. Okay, the greatest outreach people will still be very real, authentic Jews. The second principle that I want to say, I don't know whether I'm being too long in my reply here for your time allocation, is people are always going to return through other people. Modeling is absolutely crucial. And now, modeling doesn't just mean setting an example. It's got to be somebody where somebody says, oh, I would love to be like that. We know that the Friday night dinner is the single common element in stories that are otherwise very, very different in each and everybody's story of return. And the reason for that is because when people are sitting around that Shabbat table, they're saying, oh, I could do this, and I'd like to do this. I'd love to do this. I'd love to have that kind of they can picture themselves doing it. Okay, that's modeling. Modeling is not just being a Kiddush Hashem, which is very, very important. But if you're but modeling is providing them with the type of examples where they can say, wow, that's somebody I would like to be one day. And that defines, for example, we know that there are far too few females in outreach. All right, now it's not just an issue of females knowing how to relate to females. It's an issue of providing enough models for those females who want to return, as an example. And therefore, we find that although more females walk through the door, you go to any Maimonides frontline program, you find 60% females, 40% males. By the time it comes to actual observance, okay, we no longer have that advantage. And that's direct result, in my opinion, of this deficiency. So before we get on to creativity, there are basic elements. Creativity is only a cherry on the top. Before you start doing new things, make sure that you have the most important elements in place, even if it doesn't come under that romantic label of being creative. Creativity is, there are some genuine creative genii in the world, and in the world of outreach, but maybe 5. I'm not sure whether I could find 5. The average person is not creative in a truly creative sense, in the sense of constantly being able to come up with new ideas. The average person needs to work hard on producing new approaches and new models, and the best way of doing it is adjusting best practices. There is a huge world out there, and it's not just in America. And some of the greatest ideas, and some of the greatest outreach organizations are not in America. If I were to give my top 10, which I wouldn't be caught doing, but even if we were to exclude Israel, we have enormous great organizations just in the diaspora. I can think off the top of my head of at least 3 organizations, and possibly much more than that would be in my top 10. Now, why aren't we going out there and seeing what they're doing and learning from them and seeing how we could adapt their success to our success? We have to learn how to be good thieves. Instead of learning how to be better creative people, we've got to be better thieves. We've got to steal the ideas that are not, readily available for free and not really stolen, but borrowed happily on the part of those giving them. So we need more cultural interchange, more messengers who, one of the things that I love to do, I come to an organization and they tell me about a certain problem, and I say, well, let me tell you how the following organizations dealt with that problem. In England, there was this situation, and this is how they dealt with it. All right. So I instead of having to draw on my own resources, I'm able to just draw on the experience of to be able to put on the table things that are extremely helpful.
It's mind-boggling how hard we work a lot of times when you can just sort of look at the people that are successful and literally just steal them. I'm trying to become a lot better at that. Like, how am I going to do this? Oh, wait a minute. There's that other person. They've already done it, and I'll just do that. Oh, it works. Surprise.
Yeah.
Last question for this section, and I greatly appreciate the time and the thought and the amount of insight that you've shared. What piece of Torah, if you can think throughout your life, has really been, if you could say, I know it's very hard, not top 10, whatever it be, but is there one piece of Torah or teaching that you feel really compels you and gives you that purpose, and something you kind of come back to is always like your thing that really fires you up?
Well, I could say that I have a favorite person that I draw on, and I didn't know it at the time. I was personally drawn to Rav Tzadok Cohen, and I learned for many years, always with somebody senior to myself. I worked through many. I merited to work through many of his works, and at the time I just thought it was a personal thing, and then I just found that I was able to use it so many times in so many different contexts. I found it was so contemporary. I found it was so meaningful to the outside audience. I didn't realize it at the time. So I would say that Rav Tzadok Cohen has been my single most, and I never tire. I've always said to myself, and it's been true, I'm not one of those people who can take a shiur, a lesson, polish it and give it again and again and again. I would go crazy, right? I don't like to give the same shiur twice. And yet, what Rav Tzadok has to say, I find I just never tire of it. I say, wow, right? That is so amazing. It's not an easy read. It takes years and years of going through, but it's just so enriched my life, and I believe to the degree that I've been privileged to teach, the lives of those that I've taught.
There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.